Well, I once had a client whose son wanted to get in the Confederate Sons of Confederate Veterans, and she knew she had an ancestor in North Carolina who had fought in that war, and she wanted me to find out who he was and get the material together so her son could apply. And actually, I discovered, like I do very often, is that this Confederate colonel was a Union private. But I did track him. Actually, he was a Union captain from the eastern counties. There were two Union regiments that were raised in eastern North Carolina. And I traced him, and it turned out that this man had married and had a child, and then he had died, and his widow had married again, a second husband. So this child, with two of them, there were two little boys, had a stepfather. Then their mother died, and their stepfather remarried. So from the time they were little, they grew up in a family that they were no kin to. And apparently they were treated more or less like servants of some kind. And so I told her the whole story and sent her the documents. And she called. She said, "I am so glad." She said, "One of those little boys was my father, and he was such an angry man his whole life. Now I understand what happened to him, and I can deal with it better." So I was very glad I had been very honest in telling her the story. And apparently it was very helpful to her. She had had trouble dealing with this angry man until she found out what a terrible, terrible life he'd had. And there are many stories like that. This is a story I tell to professional genealogists to warn them to always tell the absolute truth to a client. Don't mess with it. Tell the client what you find. I was looking for a lady, one of the ancestral mothers. My client had found the ancestral fathers, but was having trouble finding any of the mothers. So that's what I was supposed to do. And I had looked around in the neighborhood the way you do and see if this young man had married one of his neighbor girls. And I had pretty much identified this one man as a potential father-in-law. I found his will, and sure enough, he had a little girl. He mentioned in his will a girl of the right name, and he said, "I leave to Mariah the money to buy her, to make her a silver hand." And I could not read that word as anything other than hand, H-A-N-D. So I wrote the client, I said, "I can't imagine what he meant, but this is what he said." He called me that night, the night he got the letter. It must have been 3 o'clock in the morning. He said, "You found her, you found her, you found her. We still have that hand," or it had come down in the family. She was born without a left hand, and they made a silver hand with little roses, a little Victorian hand, a silver hand for this little girl. So you never can tell when one word is the absolute clue.